Allyson, I got you to come back. It's been a little, I don't know, 2 or 3 months, I guess now, and I still have to shoot your other episode out, which is coming up soon. But I wanted to have you come back because you mentioned how you were having a child at the age of 19 and you were going off on your own for whatever reason that was. And I know you can open that up and elaborate more on that journey. We'll just focus on that one area if you don't mind. So would you mind just taking us back to that moment in life when you had that child at the age of 19 come in your way?
Yeah. So I was 19. I was living with my fiance. And by literally what I consider to be an act of God, I got pregnant. And I say that just because it's not that I'm infertile or anything, but we were using so many layers of protection. And so when my pregnancy test came back positive, I was floored. And I was so scared to tell him that I was pregnant because it was just not in our plan at all. He was 7 years older than me. He had just started a construction company. Things were rocking and rolling for him. He was getting big jobs, like, big department store type jobs. And we were doing, really well for being as young as we were. And I was also in college. So he came home from work one day and I was just like, I got to tell you something. And he was like, okay. And I was like, I'm pregnant. And he paused for a beat. And then before I realized what was happening, he was twirling me around in the kitchen. Like we were knocking like stuff off of the kitchen counters and everything. And he was just crying and he was just like, oh my God. We were hugging and he was so happy. And it was just, I felt like I had lost like 400 pounds. I was just so light, and the mistake that we made was telling his dad. His dad had keys to the house and he would just come and go whenever he'd felt like it. And there was a lot of control there. And people that don't live in a situation like that, they don't get it. They don't understand it. And I had also grown up in just horrific abuse. And so I understood that fear that you have of her, an overbearing, dominating parent like that. So he told his parents that I was pregnant and they were not having it. They just were not having it. His dad came over one night and he threw his checkbook at me and told me to write a check for the abortion. Just write your name, write your name on the check, Allyson, and put the amount in, and I'm going to sign it. And I was like, I don't know what I don't know what the amount is. And he goes, well, I do because I called, So, so a week went by and I was just getting pressured and pressured and pressured. My fiance was pressuring me. His dad was pressuring me. His mom got in on it. Then they brought his brother in on it, who I was also really close with. And then his sister in on it. And I was really close with her too. And everybody was just like, just go do it. Just go do it. So I went to the abortion clinic and, I checked myself in. And then I do want to say this because I feel like it's so super important. I believe in the agency of your body. I believe that a woman, has every right in the whole wide world to make whatever choice she wants to make. But I also want to say that choosing to stay pregnant is also a choice, right? And so I was on the table getting ready to, I was like, the IV was in my arm. I was literally getting ready to be put to sleep. And everything in my body, Jon, was like, get it off the table. Like, I can't even I mean, I get chills. It's been almost 40 years and I get chills every single time I share this story. And I was just like, I ripped the IV out of my arm, which was traumatic. I probably could have just said, I don't want to do this, and they would have been fine with it. But I ripped it out of my arm and I just went flying down the hall, and like nurses are chasing me because I'm bleeding. But I had to just get out of there. Like I left everything in my locker. I left my car keys, like everything. The nurses came out. They were amazing. They're like, listen, you don't have to do anything that you don't want. We're not going to make you do this. You don't have to do anything that you don't want to do. They brought me in. They bandaged my arm. They helped me get my clothes on. And then I made a huge, huge mistake. And I share this story because there are just some decisions that we make in life that we just can't come back from. Not with God, but with people, And I went home and I told my fiance that I had gone through with the abortion. And so, and he felt, I could tell that it was destroying him and it was destroying us. It was just bad. It was a bad time. So I got away with it for 2 weeks. For 2 weeks, everything was kind of going back to normal, but not really. And of course, he thought that we couldn't have sex because, I had an abortion. You have to wait 6 weeks. And so we weren't having sex, and it was just a weird time. And so I started puking my guts out because the morning sickness kicked in. And I have long hair now, but I have really long hair then. And I was laying under the toilet, just heaving my guts out. And he came in the bathroom and he pulled my hair up and he put it in a ponytail, and he got a wet cloth and he put it on my neck, on the back of my neck. And he bent down and he was just like, please tell me that this is morning sickness. Please just tell me that this is morning sickness. And I was like, yeah, it is. I lied to you. And I really believe that I do believe that everything happens for a reason, but I also believe that I betrayed him. And I really believe that if I had just told him the truth, that we would have somehow worked it out. But because I lied to him, and I lied to him about such a big thing, and I hurt him so much, I just feel like he just couldn't come back from it. He told me that he was going to work everything out, and that he wouldn't tell his dad. And I was like, that's great. We just need some time. That's all I had wanted in the very beginning anyway. It's just some time for us to figure out, what are we going to do, kind of thing. So he was like, I'm not going to tell my dad, it's fine. So this is, I know it's hard for people to understand this, but we didn't always have cell phones. So I had a nagging feeling all day long at school. I just had a nagging feeling. And so I found it, went to the payphone and called him at his job. And at first, his secretary wouldn't get him on the phone. And then finally, I just kept calling, and he finally got on the phone, and he was so cold. And I knew that he had told his dad. And he was just like, I don't want to talk right now. I don't want to talk about it. I'll just see you when you get home. So I had a lab that night. And so I didn't get home until it was probably like 8:30 or 9 o'clock. And my fiance's dad's truck was in our driveway. And I knew that it was not going to be good, but I had no idea what was coming next. And so I went up to the door and it wouldn't open. They had changed the locks on the house. And I went around to the back of the house and they had installed a deadbolt. So, and changed the locks. And then we lived on like a little, it's a stretch to call it a farm, but it was like there was some land and we had, cows and a pig and some horses and things like that. And I looked over into the barn area and I saw just a huge pile of garbage bags. And that was all of my stuff. So I drove a 1978 Volkswagen Beetle, and it doesn't have a lot of room in it. So I wasn't even able to take all my stuff. Because I wasn't going to go back. So I tried to fit as much of my stuff in my car as I could. And the only person, I mean, my dad, as much as I love you, Dad, as much as I loved him, he was in his alcoholism at the time. My brother was an alcoholic at the time. My oldest sister was an alcoholic. My other sister had just gotten married. And all my friends lived at home with their parents or in a dorm going to school. I had no one to call except for my mother. And nothing brought her more joy than Allyson failing. So she was more than happy for me to move back into her house so that she could hear me crying and screaming and going through my whole grieving process. And I made it about 3 weeks in my mother's house before she figured out that I was pregnant. And I didn't know it at the time. I found out years later, but she and my fiance's dad had been talking every day on the phone about how horrible of a person I am, which my mother just delighted in, gossiping and spreading rumors and lies about me and making the truth about me even 10 times worse than it was. So he had told her that they changed the locks on the house and that they kicked me out that way. So my mother came in my room one morning before I went to school, and she was shaking me awake. And she was just like, you have until Tuesday to get an abortion. And if you don't get one, then you can't live in this house. So I was in a desperate situation at that point. Now, I've had a lot of people say, why didn't you just go and do it? Because I couldn't. And that's just the only way I can describe it. Is that, I just couldn't do it. And so I told her that I would think about it. I lied. I said, I'll think about it. And I went to class and I got home and I walked up to the front door of our house that we never locked. This is in a time where you didn't have to lock the doors on your house, and the door was locked. And I went into my car, fumbled around. It took me about 20 minutes to find the key. And I went back up to the door, and she had changed the lock for the door. Except this time, everything that I owned was inside the house, not outside the house. So the only thing that I owned, the only thing in my possession, and it was like 20 degrees outside, the clothes on my back, which I was rapidly growing out of because my belly was starting to grow rapidly, a half-eaten English muffin, a half a container of orange juice, my books for school, a blanket, and because my dad had always taught me to travel in the winter with a blanket in your car because you never know what's going to happen, and $1.70 some odd cents to my name. That's all I had in the whole wide world. So I sat in my car, and at first I was just kind of freezing, and then I got really pissed, was so mad, and I started screaming at God, and I'm pounding on my steering wheel, and I'm like, I am doing every single thing that I feel like you're guiding me to do, and I'm just being shit on, and I don't understand why you keep shitting on me. I don't understand. And I was just crying and screaming and crying. And then I just heard this tiny little voice in my head, and it said, drive back to the parking garage and park and go to sleep. Well, I didn't go to sleep, but I did drive back to the parking garage. And I was able to go down into, I found this like little nook, and there wasn't any wind down there, but there were other homeless people, and there was a lot of urine, and there was a lot of human waste. So I lived in that car, in that parking space, because I ran out of gas trying to keep warm, for 3 weeks. And the way that I got out of the car, the first miracle in my life, not in my life, but in this situation, was that one of our professors had an emergency, and we got a substitute teacher. And he noticed, I think he was the only person that noticed that I had on the same clothes every single day. And that my stomach was getting bigger, and that I had black circles under my eyes, and I smelled, and it was just, I was eating food out of garbage can. I mean, it was really, really a very serious situation. I was also starting to like freeze. I mean, it was, people think that Georgia doesn't get cold. It not only does it get cold, but you can see that it was a record cold winter. It's the coldest winter that we've had on record was when I was living in my car in that parking garage. And I had gone into the locker room. I was stealing towels. I stole someone's jacket. Just to pile on top of myself in my car to try and stay warm. I had a suicide plan because it was getting to that point where I just didn't think that I could take anymore. And this man approached me one day, and he was just like, Allyson, I want you to read this book. And it was Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. And I tell everyone the same story. If I hadn't been 19, pregnant, and living in my car and starving and freezing with a suicide plan, I never would have read the book. There's no way I would have read the book. It wasn't in my genre. It wasn't in my, but what the book taught me very quickly was that the only power that we have is in the decisions that we make. And I had already made some really horrible decisions. And I knew that. And I knew that I was living in the consequences of some of those decisions. But I also knew that I was living in the consequences mostly of the decision that my mother made when I was born, which was that I was unwanted and I was the problem and I was her narcissistic supply and I was a loser. I was never going to amount to anything, and men would only want me for my looks and for sex and all these things. And I was almost every decision that I was making in my life was based on those false decisions that she had made for me and on my behalf. And what I did in my car was I made the decision, just one decision, that I was not going to live in her decisions anymore. And I can't tell you, the night that I made that decision, I was like maybe 4 or 5 nights into reading the book. And it was like I didn't even need to read any more of it. I just like put it down. And the book is not, I've had people ask me before, is the book what changed your life? No, I changed my life. You know, it opened the door. But what changed was just the feeling of freedom that came over me was unbelievable. It was unbelievable. And I thought, how can I feel this free in this prison? Like, it just didn't go together. And I was like, of course not, because I manifested this prison from that truth. So now that I'm in this freedom and I can make brand new decisions, I can create a new reality for myself. And I started thinking about being in a hot shower and being, oddly enough, like at the gynecologist, having prenatal care and swallowing vitamins and eating hot food and sleeping in a warm bed and having people like say, Allyson, how are you? How are you doing? How are you feeling? Are you okay? What do you need? What can we do for you? 9 days later, I was in my car and I'd had a really, 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 really bad day. I had failed a test because I couldn't concentrate. I failed a test, which means I was going to fail the class. And I was cold, I was hungry, and I was really like, that freedom feeling was not there. But I heard that voice again, and it just said, Allyson, just one more time, just visualize it one more time, just do that. And so I went into my little place in my brain, and I visualized, and then I heard knock on my car window, and it was the same substitute teacher who had given me the book. And he was like, I've been watching you. There was also a freeze warning that night. And people were going to shelters and all the things. He's like, I told my wife that I'm pretty sure that one of my students is in trouble. And he's like, I've been watching you come to your car. And he was like, she has hot food and a bed waiting for you. Will you please get in my truck? And honestly, people have to say this, but honestly, I was thinking, you know what, even if he's lying and he's going to kill me, like, it's okay. Like, it will be better than living out with that. Like,
No.
you know, I'm trusted him, but there was just like this little, you know, like, I don't know, this stranger danger kind of thing. So I got in his car, I got in his truck. He was telling the truth. We got to his house. His wife was standing at the front door. She was waiting for us. And for some reason, when I was visualizing, when I was in the Volkswagen, for some reason in the room that was warm and waiting for me, I had visualized these curtains with these little flowers on them. And she took me to the bedroom and she turned the light on, and it was the same curtains. It was like a God wink, you know, like, gotcha, you know? And I was just like, she was like, what is it? And I was like, I'm just, you know, and I was like, she's going to think I'm crazy and then they're going to kick me out. So I was just like, I'm just so thankful, you know, so thankful. So the three of us decided together that the plan for me would be to go to Catholic social services, even though I'm not Catholic, but they were, have them set up housing for me because I couldn't stay with my teacher, have them set up housing for me. And then I had already decided before I was rescued out of the car that if I survived living in my car, that I would place my son, I just had an intuitive feeling that it was a boy, that I would place him for adoption. I had already made that decision. And so I placed him for adoption. It was the absolute hardest thing I've ever been through in my entire life. I have never cried that hard before, and I have never cried that hard since. It was very, very difficult. And I wasn't going to do it. It was the last time that I was in the hospital, and I was just like, I was praying, and I was just like, God, I don't think I can do this. This is just too much. I just don't think I can do it. And I heard this voice inside of my head, and it was just like the same voice that had been guiding me through all of the things. And it says, if you sign the papers, you'll see him again. Now, this is a closed adoption, meaning that I knew absolutely nothing about his family, and they knew absolutely nothing about me. The only thing that they knew about me was my first name, and where I lived. So I placed him for adoption. 24 years later, I get woken up in the middle of the night. That's voice. It's time. And I knew exactly what it meant. There was not a shred of doubt in my mind. And at 9 o'clock the next morning, I was on the phone with Catholic Social Services, and I'm like, I'm going to start the search for my son. And she was like, what year was he born? I was like, 1985. And she's like, oh my gosh, that was a closed adoption. That was before we opened up adoption in Georgia. This could take a really long time. Are you sure that you want to put yourself through this? And I was like, yes. So I faxed the paperwork back in, and the next day at 12 o'clock on the dot, my phone rang, and it was Catholic Social Services. My son and I, at the exact same time, faxed our paperwork in to find each other. And they knew it by the birth date, the hospital where he was born, and that I knew what his family named him, and he knew that I was Allyson. And the woman at Catholic Social Services was like, I cannot even tell you what we have been through emotionally. She's like, I am wrecked. Like, this never happened, and it just, it was just another week from God. Like, yeah, I know that that you doubt me, but I'm just gonna show you one more time that, I'm here and you're doing the right thing. You're on the right path.
Wow. Yeah, it's a lot. You did a lot there, and I couldn't imagine what you went through. I know you sharing and going through it in detail. You shared a lot, if not everything. So I feel for you. I couldn't, you're pretty much at your darkest moment. And as a 19, a young woman, I couldn't imagine. Yeah. So, I mean, going through all that, and, we don't have to go, I know we spoke more on other things, but I mean, how'd you carry your life out real, in a short summary after that? I know it was hard to do all that, and you were a strong mother. Then I know that's probably why you had a hard time giving them up for adoption, because you went through all that stuff.
Yeah.
Hold on to them, and then had to let them, or decided to let them go, at the end there. So, I mean, in a short summary, I mean, like, how did you carry out after that, from there to here in a quick summary?
Gosh, in a quick summary, very quick summary. I came to realize more and more and more that I am a survivor of abuse, because I was in so much denial around that, you know. I just and you know, my dad, I love him, but he was an enabler. You know, he allowed my mother to beat us. He allowed her to deprive us of food and just emotionally and mentally and verbally, let's like destroy us. And so, you know, I always, you know, growing up, it was just like, you know, he's the good guy, you know, she's the bad guy. And then, you know, one of the blessings about being a birth mother and going through the adoption process was that Catholic Social Services made therapy mandatory. And I had a beautiful, amazing, thank you, therapist. She's crossed over now. She didn't focus on the pregnancy as much as she focused on my childhood and what had ended me up in the situation that I was in. And it was in that process and then continuing therapy off and on, you know, throughout my lifetime. It helped me detach from this enmeshment that narcissists want you to believe that's necessary to live. And when it wasn't until I got one arm out of the web, and then I got a leg out of the web, and then, you know, a foot out of the web. And it was just like, wow, it's kind of like that same, you know, God moment that I had in the Volkswagen, and like that feeling of just a freedom. It's like every time I experienced that sense of freedom over another revelation or another breakthrough that I would have, it just gave me the courage and the strength to just become an even better version of Allyson, become an even better version. And I just built on that, you know, and, you know, better doesn't mean best, and it doesn't mean that the journey is over. I mean, I hope that 30 years from now, I'm saying, you know, I want to be an even better version of myself, a better version of myself. But it really, you know, it was really about that. And then I'll be 59 years old next week. And I really, you know, I want my focus to really start becoming more and more and more, you know, humanitarian. And because so many people have unresolved trauma. And underneath that trauma is the most beautiful life of freedom. And it's really like I'm just being called, you know, more and more and more to, you know, I'm not a therapist, so I can't do like the trauma work. But the people that I love to work with are the people that have already had like a baseline of training, and, you know, they're over that hump, but they feel blessed and lucky for the life that they live, instead of understanding that they've created and they can create even more the more that they overcome their trauma, if that makes sense.
It does. And I'm glad you elaborated on all of that. I appreciate it. You know, I don't want to tie you up any more than, you know, what I had from you today, but I do appreciate sharing that. You know, and these are the stories, part of the journey that I think a lot of people need to hear, you know, from how you had to go through all that horrible stuff, you know, just to get to, you know, who you are today and come out as a better version, like you said yourself, and you just keep on growing. Yeah. And I'm sure in 30 years from now, you're going to keep on growing, you know, and that's what That's the people I keep running into. They just want to keep on growing. But yeah, I would focus on working on helping those people that need to break through their past trauma and show that there's some light out there and that they are better people than what they think they are because of the surroundings, you know. Unfortunately, that's what it is, you know, and you had to step away from all that, and you did your best to get away from it, but they did it for you in a sense, right? And yeah, and you became so much. So, I mean, I guess that's a blessing in disguise as well, too, you know. So, Allyson, go ahead.
I was meditating this morning, and I just want to leave this. I feel like this is a great way to wrap this up. I was meditating this morning, and I got the message. They didn't abandon you; they set you free.
I agree.
So, yeah. So anyone who's feeling abandoned right now, I just want you to know that you were just set free.
Yep. Yeah, there's a reason something happened. It's hard to see it in the moment, but when you step back and you look back, you go, okay, yeah, it's an opportunity, right?
Yeah.
Allyson, I can't appreciate enough you coming back and sharing. Yeah, that's a huge part of your life that you share with us. So thank you.